My name's Greg Cope, and my interest in railways goes back to when I was a child. My grandfather worked in the railways. I come from Ipswich, which is a railway town or city in Queensland. My father worked for the railways, and it was expected that I would work for the railways, and I did. Temporarily, I became a trainee fireman to drive trains, but I didn't really like shift work, and I was young, so I decided that wasn't really my career, but I always had an interest in railways. As a child, having a family that worked in the railways, we used to get a railway pass for our holidays, and we used to use the railway pass to travel around Queensland. So I really did develop a very strong interest in railways. But also, as I became a bit older, I found out about the Railway Historical Society. It operates a branch here in Queensland. I joined that society and met other people who had interest in railways, and I became quite involved with that society over a number of years. The establishment of railways is very interesting in Queensland. We're a very small colony with a very low population and vast distances, and no way really of accessing those distances except for railways, and railways were seen to be a vital link to open up the country. But Queensland didn't have much money. We had a population maybe of 60,000 people covering a vast area, and the Queensland government looked at railways and originally proposed to build a timber pony railway, a railway which was used in England by horse on wooden rails. But Queensland then got involved and hired an engineer, Abraham Fitzgibbon, and he became a crucial part in the development of railways in Queensland. Now, Australia, as you know, we're all these separate colonies, and they're like separate countries. And New South Wales started developing its railways, and that was standard gauge. Queensland thought it could not afford to build 4 foot 8.5 railways, so Fitzgibbon actually recommended 3 foot 6. Nowhere in the world had 3 foot 6 been adopted for a main trunkline railway, but Abraham Fitzgibbon was a firm believer that 3 foot 6 could achieve that in Queensland, and really he was right. We have a very good working system today, but it ended up being a trial because we didn't have much money, basically. But it was a successful trial. The Queensland Railways originally started as all separate railway systems. In southeast Queensland, we had the South Western Railway. The first railway proposed was Ipswich to Dalby, and then a line to Warwick, and they would become the Western Line and the South Western Line. At the same time, from Rockhampton, there's a railway constructed out to Westwood, and there's a railway being constructed out from Townsville to Charters Towers, and eventually there was railways built out from Cairns, Bundaberg, Maryborough, and eventually by the 1920s all those railway lines were joined up. I think the Queensland State Library probably is the premium organisation to do research on the history of railways in Queensland. The Queensland State Archives hold some original material created by the Railway Department, but the State Library have such a vast collection that it includes a whole range of material. It includes ephemera, timetables, working documents. Those type of things aren't normally kept in a state archive. So the library can give you a really rich source of a whole cross-section of how the railways operated and ran. So as well as their photographic collection is the best collection in Queensland. John Kerr's notebooks, really, for a rail enthusiast in Queensland wanting to do research, it really is the holy grail of material for Queensland Rail. What John set about was documenting from the very beginning when railways were proposed in Queensland, documenting any mention or discussion of railways in Parliament, in any reports, and he cited all his information. So you can look and find the reference to the first parliamentary report on discussion of building a railway in Queensland. It's really quite invaluable work. It's an amazing achievement. In John Kerr's notebooks, there's probably over 20 years of collecting information. This was pre-computer days, pre-internet days, so he would gather information from newspapers, parliamentary reports, the Railway Commissioners' reports. Anywhere where the government published information about the railway, he gathered that information. Also, he collected information from other people in the society in Queensland that knew something about the railways, that provided information firsthand. And that's what makes the collection unique, is that collection of information. No one else has done that to bring it all together, and it sits in these 8 volumes of his notes. John Kerr's notes include every aspect of the Queensland Government railways, but it also includes information about tramway systems. There's nowhere that's left out. So anything that you'd regard as a railway line in Queensland, that is included in that notebook. These are John Kerr's notes, which are in the State Library. They're probably the most valuable resource we have on the history of Queensland Railways. And now they're all digitised, which is I just find that amazing. They're really such a rich resource. There's over 7,000 pages of really extensive and valuable railway notes. And I really encourage anyone to use them. I really would. They're wonderful. John Kerr's notes are not only useful for rail enthusiasts or someone wanting to write a history about a particular railway line or railway activity in Queensland, it's very useful even for local historians. For example, he talks a lot of the Mackay area when they've had severe flooding and how bridges were washed away and how it affected the community. He talks about operations during the war, special trains, when electricity was introduced, a whole range of things. I learnt by reading his notes that during the Depression, they reduced the fares because people couldn't afford to pay the railway fares. But all that is there in John Kerr's notes. Recently, I was asked about the Wee McGregor mine, which probably no one in Queensland has ever heard about, let alone even know that there was a railway there. So I looked into John Kerr's notebooks, and he has an entry for the Wee McGregor tramway, which was located up in northwest Queensland. And if I go to the position in the book, it gives me quite a bit of information, which is probably the only place you would find this information on the Wee McGregor tramway. In 1912, the Hampton Cloncurry Company bought dearly the Wee McGregor mines in the ranges near the present site of Mary Kathleen and built a 22-mile railway to Ballara and the mines in 1915. It proved a blunder owing to the lack of ore. Near Wee McGregor, Corella Copper Company furnace produced 2,000 tonnes of copper before ore gave out in 1917. It also tells me it was a 2-foot railway gauge and that it really closed completely on the 2nd February 1921. When I was a young rail enthusiast travelling around Queensland, I came across John Kerr travelling around the railways as well, and he had copious notebooks and he'd be taking photos and taking notes of everything that was going on. He was a statistician, he worked for the CSIRO, and when you look through his notebooks, the first impression you get is that he was obsessed with numbers. A railway runs on a system of numbers. Trains have numbers, railway stations have numbers, trains run to timetables, so maybe it suited John, but John took it a step further of linking the history and information about the railways with all these numbers as well. John Kerr was a very intelligent person. He's published quite a few books that are available. His wife, Dr. Ruth Kerr, has also published on railways as well. So he certainly was probably the leading authority on Queensland Railways. An interesting aspect of John is that it would have taken an enormous amount of time and over more than 20 years collecting this information for his notebooks, and it was a hobby. John Kerr's notes are really interesting, but when the first time you look at them, it looks confusing. There's a huge amount of material, information, numbers, and the system that is used, you can't understand immediately when you look at it. But once you start digging below that layer, it does make sense. There's a lot of use of abbreviations in John's notes, but once you get used to them, it's fairly straightforward. There's quite a lot of mileages, like 75M, 35C, number of chains. WN 3828, that means weekly notice for the year 1928, and it's number 38 for that year. John's relied heavily upon information from weekly notices as well. Once you start using the notes and understanding the abbreviations, it's quite simple. It's not as complex as it looks. For the first-time user of John Kerr's notebooks, what I'd suggest, and this is from my own experience, is that you need to give yourself enough time to look at them slowly and to digest on how they're set out and what they contain. There's 8 volumes. All those volumes are really large documents. It's not a quick fix. If someone was just wanting a quick answer on what year the railway refreshment room opened at Central, it's going to be difficult to find that in a few minutes. You're not going to find it. But I think to understand them and to use them, you just need to spend a bit of time looking at them. The period that the notebooks cover are from the very beginning of when railways were discussed, from when Queensland was formed as a separate colony in 1859. So I think you could honestly say it covers from about 1860 to probably early 1970s. What's happened now is that information isn't being collected in one place. It may be out there, but the thing about John Kerr's notebooks is that it's brought all that information to one place. That's what makes it good. And I wish someone was continually doing it today, but